stepping into the story of the Israelites at a pivotal point, a moment in their history that will change everything. God is about to do something monumental, see a 400-year-old promise come true, and a new nation arise. It's Exodus. Back in Genesis, the first book in the Bible, when the Israelite family, right at the end, there are a few dozen people, and Jacob, the head of the family, he moves them all to Egypt to avoid a famine. He goes there with God's blessing. God says he's going to make them into a great nation while they're there. So they settle in Egypt, and for a while things are going really well. They're thriving, they're growing, their family flourishes. In Exodus 1 verse 7 it says they became extremely powerful and filled the land. But over time, a new king, a new pharaoh comes on the throne who doesn't know who these Israelites are or why they're there. All he knows is that they're different, and he sees them as a threat. This is in Exodus chapter 1. I'm going to start reading at verse 9. So the king said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't and war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labour. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramesses as supply centres for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. So the Egyptians try to crush them, but it doesn't work, because God is with them, and he said he's going to make them into a mighty nation while they're there, and if he says it, he's going to do it, and a king or slave drivers or whoever won't stop him. And this is where we join the Israelites here in what is, on the one hand, such an awful, horrific, dark time for them as a people. They're slaves, they're oppressed, they're being worked to death, powerless in despair. But on the other hand, there's still this glimmer of hope, this light in the darkness, this promise that God is still with them, they are still his people, because they keep on thriving. God keeps working out his plan. I wonder if for some of us we would find it encouraging sometimes when all is dark and things seem terrible, and it could be easy to say, God has forgotten me, he's left me here in my suffering. Sometimes if we could stop and look and see where God is working, that might encourage us. I know, looking back at the past year when things were so hard, I can see him. I can see his blessings along the way that show me he hadn't taken a year off. He hadn't left me to it. And if you know your Bible or you've watched The Prince of Egypt, you will know that deliverance is on his way, and it's through this man called Moses. He's the one God is going to use to bring salvation, to lead nearly 2 million of them out of Egypt, across the desert and back home to the promised land. They're going from slaves to warriors to kings to priests and prophets. But it doesn't start with Moses as a hero, does it? Sailing down the Nile, swinging his sword. This starts, as so many of God's salvation stories do, with a baby. 80 years before God was going to bring an answer, when the people are still just groaning and praying and weeping, God has started moving people into position, setting things in motion. They're going to bring the answer. And here at the start, actually, it's the women that are the stars of the story, whose incredible courage and faith in God sets the wheels in motion for this epic event that's going to shape the destiny of millions and change the world. We've got the midwives, we're going to read about them. We've got Moses' mum, this woman called Jochebed, and her daughter Miriam, and also the Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, has a part to play. But because I haven't got a lot of time, I'm just going to quickly look at the midwives, and then we're going to have a look at Moses' mum, at Jochebed. So these midwives then, if we move on in chapter 1 to verse 15, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah: "When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, Watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. "Why have you done this?" he demanded. "Why have you allowed the boys to live?" "The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women," the midwives replied. "They're more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we can't get there in time." So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. There were hundreds of thousands of Israelites women. I'm sure there were a lot more midwives, but these two are, I guess we call the head midwives, that actually go and get called to see the most powerful man in the land, a merciless man who hates their people, who wants to wipe them out, and has chosen the midwives to be his chief assassins. But these women, as fearful as they might be of Pharaoh, and they'd have good reason to be, he hates them, with good reason, they fear God more. They can see firsthand that God is blessing these babies, and if it comes to choosing sides to who they're going to serve, they're going to choose God. The Bible talks about how important it is that as Christians we respect authority, we respect our governments, our laws. You can read about that in Romans chapter 13. But it also says that if it comes down to obeying God or man, we should obey God. You can read that in Acts chapter 5, verse 29. That takes courage sometimes, doesn't it? And faith. It also takes wisdom, perhaps more importantly, in knowing when and how to do that. Not killing baby boys is pretty clear cut. But when it comes to a lot of today's matters of civil disobedience, we need to think carefully. And I think it's worth noting that these midwives didn't argue with Pharaoh. They didn't try to fight anyone. They just quietly got on, carried on doing their job, saving lives rather than harming them, and trusting God to protect them as they did it. So that's a question, isn't it? Who will you serve? Who will you follow? Whose authority comes first in your life? It goes on to say that God not only protected them, he blessed them with families of their own. I'm sure these women had no idea that this covert act of rebellion will not only save the boys, but save the whole nation, because one of those midwives will probably have been there when this special baby Moses was born. And in making the courageous, the faith-filled choice, ignoring the Egyptian soldiers breathing down their necks, they were the first step in God's divine rescue. But then we come on to this couple, Amram and Jochebed. They've already got 2 children, Miriam and Aaron, and then in the worst possible time, Jochebed is pregnant again. How hard do you think they prayed that this baby would be a girl this time? Because when Pharaoh's plan with the midwives fails, he doesn't give up. He ropes in all the Egyptian peoples and tells them that they need to throw the newborn baby boys into the River Nile to drown them. Just the boys, because Pharaoh thinks it's the men who are the threat. That was perhaps his first mistake, as we're finding out this morning. But Amram and Jochebed, they do have a boy. And they can see he's special. And while we could say that all parents think their newborn baby is special, this time he was really special. Can you imagine those 3 months hiding their baby, trying to keep him quiet, trying to shush his crying, knowing that at any moment an Egyptian could turn up? But then this godly woman, Jochebed, she gets an idea. A crazy, wild plan starts to form. An audacious plan. This mother is not resigned to her fate. She's not sitting back and being the victim here. She's a woman of God. In Hebrews 11 it says that Moses' parents could see that God had given them an unusual child, so they weren't afraid of the king's edict. But Jochebed also knows that trusting God doesn't always mean just sitting back and leaving it all up to him, expecting God to sort it. She knows that it's up to her here to do something so extraordinarily brave and risky that it must have come from God. She watches and she learns where the princess bathes. She sees that this princess is not like her dad with a cruel heart. She's got a tender heart, a maternal heart. Maybe she sees that this princess doesn't have any children of her own and longs for one. And how perfect if that was a son to inherit the throne. So with such care and attention. She weaves a basket. So carefully, I'm sure. She waterproofs it with tar and pitch, maybe tucks in a blanket. How she must have prayed as she worked. How her arms must have trembled and her heart broke, even as it pounded in her chest as she put her baby inside and carried him down to the Nile, to the reeds, surrendering him because she couldn't save her baby. But she knew that with God we can walk right up to the place that is supposed to be our downfall, our destruction, knowing it can be redeemed into the place of our salvation for our good and for his glory. What faith to entrust her baby boy to God like that, knowing that when and if the princess found him, she could follow her father's orders. How easy would it have been? They were there in the Nile just to do what the people expect and chuck him in. Any sensible parent would have kept their baby as far away from that river as they could. Anything but that. I wonder if any parents listening today have got an anything but that this morning God is saying, you don't have to fear it. I love them. I've got a plan for them. They're special to me. I've got something bigger in mind. What are you straining and striving to protect someone from? Maybe to protect yourself from. And God is saying, this time they're going in. Can you trust that? Encased in a basket of prayer and wisdom and trust in God and his guidance, that sometimes our anything but that is what we need to do. Because even if the princess did find him, which she did, and she adopted him eventually as her own, we'll read about it in a minute, and took him to the palace, even then she's taking him to the Egyptian palace. The Egyptians hate the Hebrews. They're trying to kill the Hebrew boys. Her baby boy is going there. This hotbed of evil and immorality, that's the best option she's got right now, about as far from his family, his community, his culture, his religion, his God as he could get. That is not a likely place for Moses to end up leading them. But she must have heard God's persistent promise, mustn't she? You can trust me. You can trust that I know what I'm doing with this precious boy. Jochebed and Amram had so little control. They were slaves. They were brutally treated. They were subject to these laws designed to break them. But they chose to believe that God was still in control, and he had the power to decide what happened to their family. They chose not to be victims, but to be vessels for God's glory. And this is what happened. Chapter 2 we're into now, verse 4. The baby's sister stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen to him, to Moses. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you, she asked. Yes, do, the princess replied. So the girl went and called the baby's mother. Take this baby and nurse him for me, the princess told the baby's mother. I will pay you for your help. So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. Later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, I lifted him out of the water. This is God at work, isn't it? Not only did Moses escape the river, not only did the princess ensure his protection, no one could touch him. Jochebed gets her baby back for the next few years, and she gets paid to do it. Moses then spends his later childhood and his 20s and his 30s living in the palace. Acts 7 tells us he becomes mighty in word and deed, and he learns all the wisdom of Egypt. This is the most advanced civilization in the world at the time, and he's learning how to lead. He's being trained in war and in philosophy and mathematics and medicine and engineering. He's being trained to lead a nation. Only the palace doesn't know it's not the Egyptian nation that he's going to lead. but the people they're currently trying to destroy, and he's going to lead them right on out of there. What did Jochebed hope for when she weaved that basket, when she left her baby in the water? That he would survive? That the princess would take pity on him? That he'd be okay? What were the Israelites praying for, I wonder, in their groans? That their work would be easier, that the slave drivers might be fairer, maybe a new king would come along who was kinder, maybe that their boys would be spared. They'd been slaves for generations. Could they even imagine or hope for anything more? But God says no to that prayer. No, I'm not making the work easier, or you're sparing your boys the river. I'm taking nearly 2 million people out of here, across the desert to freedom. I'm redeeming the 400-year-old promise to take you back home to the land that I have given you. I'm turning you from slaves to a holy nation and a chosen people. I am glorifying myself in all the world through this, so that until this world's end, people will read this story, they will hear about it, and they will know that I am God. And through you, my people, and one day bringing salvation, not just for 2 million, but for the whole world through your descendant, Jesus Christ. You might be praying that your child, your family member, your neighbour, your friend gets through this year, survives it. I can relate to those kind of prayers. I prayed a lot of them. God, please just keep them. Please just protect them. Maybe God would say to you that he's going to lead them, albeit on a winding road, to a place where they will fulfill their destiny in him, whatever that might be. As you pray, why not ask him for his perspective, his plans, his patience? It took 80 years for Moses. And then the faith and the courage to play your part in that. I don't believe God's long-term goal for us is ever just survival, just hanging on in there long-term. It's transformation. He's always working in us. He said that Egypt was like a flaming furnace. A furnace is used to purify, to strengthen, to get ready, to make us more like Jesus, which is his ultimate goal. Maybe for some of us, a challenge in the faith of Jochebed is to dream bigger than just surviving, to pray, hope, plan for something greater than just getting through another day in the hard circumstances that we find ourselves in, along with the courage to then step out and act in line with God's redemption plan, however wild it might seem. Who or what are you going to trust? Do you dare to follow God regardless, to serve him like the midwives, to trust him like Jochebed? God loves to use the most unlikely people, the people that the world might cast as a bit part. 2 midwives who chose to serve God and get on with their job, no matter what it cost them. A slave woman who chose to trust God, even with what was most precious to her, to reject the notion of being a helpless victim, to choose her true identity as a woman of God, and then to plan and to prep and to act with outrageous faith. A sister who listened to her wise mother, waited and then knew when it was time to step out and speak up and play her part. Someone, Miriam, who then went on to have an incredible role in this new nation, Israel. A princess who chose to go against her family culture, her father's orders, her country, and to choose love. The truth is that if God has a plan, if he's made a promise, no one, no matter how evil or powerful or determined, can stop it. And we can trust him in this. Are you going to trust him enough to ask him what your plan is, your part is, in this chapter of his wondrous story? I've seen you move.